Welcome, listeners. You are about to embark on a 12-hour journey into one of the most mysterious and influential books of the 19th century, ETIDORHPA, by John Uri Lloyd, published in 1895. This is not simply a book review or summary. This is a complete narrative retelling designed to transport you into the depths of the earth and the depths of consciousness. Whether you're cleaning, working, relaxing, or preparing for sleep, let this story wash over you. Let it take you on a journey from the surface world down through caverns and passages, through underground oceans and crystalline cities, to the very center of the earth where mysteries beyond imagination await. This is the story of a man who betrayed a secret society and was sentenced not to death, but to something far stranger, a journey into the hollow earth, guided by an eyeless being, descending toward a communion with the goddess ETIDORHPA, Aphrodite spelled backwards, the consciousness at the planetary core. Now, settle in, take a deep breath, and let us begin. Chapter 1. The Mysterious Manuscript. Picture a quiet autumn evening in Cincinnati, Ohio, in the year 1886. The gas lamps flicker along the cobblestone streets, casting long shadows between the brick buildings. In a comfortable home on a tree-lined avenue, a man sits in his study, surrounded by books on chemistry and pharmacy. This is John Uri Lloyd, a respected pharmaceutical chemist, and his evening is about to take a very strange turn. There's a knock at the door. Lloyd rises from his leather chair, the floorboards creaking beneath his feet, and makes his way down the narrow hallway. The air smells of pipe tobacco and old paper. When he opens the heavy oak door, he finds a man standing on his doorstep, a stranger dressed in dark, travel-worn clothing. The stranger's face is lined with age and something else, something harder to name. It's the face of someone who has seen things that cannot be unseen, experienced things that cannot be unexplained. His eyes hold a peculiar intensity, and when he speaks, his voice is quiet but urgent. "Mr. Lloyd," the stranger says, "I have come a great distance to find you. I carry with me a manuscript, a record of events so extraordinary that most would dismiss them as fiction. But I assure you, every word is true." Lloyd invites the man inside, curiosity overcoming his natural caution. They sit in the study, and the stranger produces a thick bundle of papers, yellowed with age, covered in cramped handwriting. The pages feel brittle to the touch, as if they've survived some ordeal. "I call myself on the man," the stranger says, "for reasons that will become clear. The story contained in these pages is not mine to tell in person, but I have been entrusted to see that it reaches the world. You, Mr. Lloyd, have been chosen as its publisher." Lloyd examines the papers. The handwriting is meticulous despite its age. He begins to read, and what he finds is astonishing. This is the account of a journey into the earth itself, a descent through caverns and passages that lead not to molten rock, but to an entirely different world. A hollow earth, an interior realm where the laws of nature operate differently, where eyeless beings dwell in eternal darkness, where ancient secrets are guarded by mysterious forces. "Why me?" Lloyd asks, looking up from the pages. The man leans forward, his weathered hands clasped together. "Because you are a man of science who has not closed his mind to possibilities beyond the current understanding. Because you have the means to publish this account and the credibility to give it weight. And because, Mr. Lloyd, whether you know it or not, you have been prepared for this moment." The stranger makes Lloyd promise 3 things. First, to publish the manuscript exactly as written, without alteration. Second, to commission illustrations based on the descriptions within. And third, to present it to the world not as fiction, but as a true account. Lloyd, intrigued beyond measure, agrees. Over the following weeks, the man visits Lloyd regularly, providing additional details and clarifications. He speaks of the manuscript's author, a man whose name has been deliberately omitted. This nameless protagonist lived decades ago, in the 1840s, and his story begins not with adventure, but with betrayal. Let us now enter the manuscript itself and experience the story as Lloyd first read it, by lamplight, in his Cincinnati study. The manuscript begins with these words: "I was a member of a secret society. I will not name this brotherhood, for even now, after all these years, certain oaths bind me to silence on specific matters. But what I can tell you is this: I rose through the degrees of initiation, gaining access to knowledge that is kept from the uninitiated. I learned of ancient mysteries, of hidden forces that govern the world, of truths that conventional religion and science have either forgotten or deliberately concealed." The author describes his younger self as ambitious and proud. He had been honored to be admitted into this secret society, which met in an underground chamber beneath an ordinary-looking building in a city he refuses to name. Imagine descending a narrow stone staircase, each step worn smooth by centuries of footfalls. The air grows cooler as you descend, and you can smell the dampness of earth. At the bottom, you pass through a heavy door into a vaulted chamber lit by oil lamps that cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. Around a long table sit men in ceremonial robes, their faces grave. These are not charlatans or pretenders. These are educated men, professionals, respected members of society who gather in secret to preserve knowledge they believe too dangerous for the masses. The protagonist had been so proud of his membership in this brotherhood. But pride, as we know, often precedes a fall. One evening, after too much wine at a social gathering, he spoke carelessly. He revealed to an outsider, someone not initiated into the mysteries, certain secrets that should have remained hidden. The exact nature of these secrets is not specified, but they concern the true structure of the earth and the existence of passages leading to an interior realm. Word of his indiscretion reached the society. A trial was convened in that same underground chamber. Picture the scene. The protagonist stands alone in the center of the vaulted room while his former brothers sit in judgment. The lamplight flickers across their faces, some showing anger, others disappointment, still others a strange kind of pity. The leader of the society, an elderly man with a long white beard, rises to pronounce judgment. "You have broken your oath. You have revealed to the uninitiated that which must remain hidden. For this, the usual penalty would be death." The protagonist's blood runs cold. He can hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. "These crystals," the protagonist says, running his hand along a formation that thrums with energy, "how did they grow so large?" "Time," the guide says simply, "and conditions that do not exist on the surface. Extreme pressure, mineral-rich waters, electromagnetic forces that encourage crystallization. Some of these formations are millions of years old, growing atom by atom across ages that dwarf human civilization." As they proceed through the crystal passage, the protagonist begins to hear something. At first, he thinks it is his imagination, but the sound grows clearer. A kind of music, if music can be made without instruments. The crystals are vibrating, resonating with each other, creating harmonics that wash through the passage in waves of pure tone. "The song of the stones," the guide says. "In the deep places, even inanimate matter seems alive. Or perhaps it has always been alive, and surface dwellers simply cannot perceive it." The protagonist listens to the crystal song, and he feels something stirring in his chest, an emotion he cannot name. It is like homesickness, but not for any place he has ever been. It is like longing, but for something he has never known. The music speaks to some deep part of him, something older than his surface identity, and tears begin to stream down his cheeks though he does not know why he is crying. The guide allows him to stand and listen for a long time, making no move to hurry him. Finally, the protagonist wipes his eyes and nods that he is ready to continue. "The deeper you go," the guide says gently, "the more you will feel such things. The interior awakens the soul in ways the surface cannot. This is why the secret societies guard knowledge of these depths. Not everyone is ready to feel what you just felt. They leave the crystal passage and enter a region where the air itself seems to glow with a faint golden light. There is no visible source for this illumination, yet visibility is better here than in any passage they have traversed. The protagonist can see clearly for hundreds of feet in every direction. The passage opens into a vast underground plain. The ceiling is so far above that it is lost in darkness, but the floor stretches out like a landscape, complete with hills and valleys, all contained within the Earth's interior. And growing across this plain is a forest, but not a forest of trees. These are fungi again, but of a scale the protagonist could not have imagined. They tower 50, 60, even 100 feet high, their caps spread wide enough to shade an area as large as a house. They come in every color imaginable: deep purple, electric blue, blood red, luminous green. Their stalks are thick as tree trunks, and some have developed bark-like outer layers for support. The great fungal forest, the guide announces. One of the wonders of the interior. These organisms have evolved to fill the ecological niche that trees occupy on the surface. They photosynthesize not with light, but with the etheric energies that flow through the earth. They grow faster than any surface tree, but they are also more fragile, more temporary. A fungus that reaches this size may live only a few decades before it collapses and feeds the next generation. They enter the forest, walking between the towering stalks. The air smells rich and earthy, heavy with spores and the complex chemistry of fungal metabolism. The protagonist sees that the forest floor is covered with smaller fungi of every description. Mushrooms like tiny umbrellas, shelf fungi growing in stacked layers, puffballs as large as boulders, jelly fungi that quiver with his footsteps. And there is animal life here, or something like it. Creatures scurry among the fungi, things that might be insects or might be something else entirely, their forms strange and segmented. Larger creatures move in the middle canopy, swinging from fungal cap to fungal cap on what might be limbs or tentacles. The protagonist glimpses something that could be a mammal, furred and four-legged, but when it turns to look at him, he sees it has no eyes, only sensory pits, and its face is structured in a way no surface creatures would be. Life adapts, the guide says again. Given energy, raw materials, and time, evolution fills every available niche. This forest supports an entire ecosystem, predators and prey, decomposers and primary producers, all without a single ray of sunlight. They make camp under one of the giant fungi, and the guide gathers smaller mushrooms for their meal. He selects specimens with care, avoiding certain varieties that he indicates are poisonous or psychoactive beyond what is beneficial. As they eat, the protagonist asks, "How much farther to the center?" "Farther than you can imagine," the guide says. "We have descended many miles, but the interior is vast. The earth is not a thin shell over a small hollow. The inner realm has its own continents, its own oceans, regions that stretch for hundreds or thousands of miles. And we must cross much of this distance to reach the central sphere where ETIDORHPA dwells." "Tell me more about her." "About ETIDORHPA." The guide is silent for a long moment, his eyeless face turned upward toward the cap of the giant fungus above them. Finally he speaks. "ETIDORHPA is the heart of the earth. Not the heart of stone and iron that surface geologists imagine, but the heart of consciousness, of creation, of life itself. She is the principle of generation, the force that takes formless potential and gives it shape. Some call her the world soul. Others call her the divine matrix. The secret societies have many names for her, but all point to the same truth. At the center of the earth dwells a consciousness that is both vast and intimate, both terrible and loving, both the source of all material existence and its ultimate destination." The protagonist struggles to comprehend this. Is she a goddess? A being? She is more and less than a being. She is a place and a presence, a concept and a reality. When you finally reach her, you will understand. Or perhaps you will not understand, but you will experience, and the experience will change you forever. They sleep in the fungal forest, and the protagonist dreams again. He dreams of descending through layers of meaning as well as layers of stone. Each level of the interior corresponds to a level of understanding, a stripping away of false certainties, a peeling back of illusions. The surface world, with its bright sunlight and its materialistic science, is the realm of Maya, of deception. The interior is the realm of truth, where reality shows itself without the pretty lies that make surface life bearable. He wakes from this dream feeling unsettled, not sure whether these thoughts are his own or have been planted in his mind by the mushrooms he has consumed, by the strange air he breathes, by the guide's constant teaching. They continue through the fungal forest for what must be days, though time remains impossible to measure. The golden glow that illuminates this region never brightens or dims, giving no indication of day or night. The protagonist sleeps when exhaustion overwhelms him and wakes when his body has rested enough. Sometimes the guide sleeps at the same times, sometimes not. It is as if they are operating on different circadian rhythms now, their bodies no longer synchronized with each other or with any external cycle. At last, they reach the far edge of the fungal forest, where the towering growths thin out and give way to bare stone. Before them stretches a vast chasm, a crack in the earth so wide that the far side is barely visible in the golden light. The chasm's depth is unfathomable, disappearing into blackness far below. "We must cross," the guide says. "How?" the protagonist asks, seeing no bridge, no path around. "We descend into the chasm, then climb the far side. There are passages within the walls." They approach the edge carefully, and the protagonist sees that indeed there are handholds carved into the stone, a precarious path leading down into the darkness. He feels a surge of fear. The descent looks impossibly dangerous, and one misstep would send him falling into that infinite blackness below. But the guide has already started down, his hands and feet finding holds with perfect confidence. The protagonist has no choice but to follow. The climb is terrifying. The handholds are sometimes secure, sometimes crumbling. The protagonist's muscles scream with effort as he clings to the rock face. Several times, he freezes, unable to force himself to make the next move, certain that he will fall. But each time, the guide's voice comes from below, calm and encouraging, guiding him to the next secure hold. They descend for what feels like hours, the golden glow of the fungal forest fading above them until they are climbing in near darkness. The protagonist's world narrows to the next handhold, the next foothold, the rhythm of reach and grip and step that keeps him alive. And then, finally, they reach a ledge, a platform of stone jutting from the chasm wall. The protagonist collapses onto it, his arms trembling with exhaustion, sweat streaming down his face despite the cool air. "Rest," the guide says. "The hardest part is behind us." They rest on the ledge, and as the protagonist's breathing slows, he becomes aware of a sound rising from the depths below. It is like wind, but not wind. Like water, but not water. A rushing, flowing sound that speaks of tremendous forces in motion. "What is that?" he asks. "The breath of the earth," the guide says. "The circulation of air and energy through the interior. There are currents down there that would tear a human apart, winds that blow with the force of hurricanes, all contained within the planet's hollow heart." After they have rested, they begin climbing again, but this time upward, ascending the far wall of the chasm. This is somewhat easier than the descent, as they are climbing toward the light rather than away from it. The protagonist's muscles have adjusted to the exertion, and he finds a rhythm that makes the climb almost meditative. They emerge on the far rim of the chasm as the second hour of our journey concludes, the protagonist transformed once more, his body leaner and stronger, his mind more flexible and open to the impossible truths he continues to encounter. Ahead of them, the passage continues downward, always downward, spiraling toward the distant center where mysteries beyond comprehension await. Chapter 2. through mammoth passages. The darkness presses close, a tangible presence that seems almost alive. The protagonist has lost all sense of time. Has it been days since they left the fungus forest? There is no way to tell. His stomach tells him when he is hungry, and the guide provides food at irregular intervals. His body tells him when he needs sleep, and they rest when necessary. But whether the surface world above has experienced one sunset or 100, he cannot say. The passage they follow now is different from anything they have traversed before. The walls are smooth, almost glassy, as if melted by intense heat. When the protagonist runs his hand along the surface, it feels cool and slick, and something in its texture suggests that this tunnel was not carved by water or human hands, but by some other force entirely. What made this passage? He asks, his voice sounding small in the confining space. There are things that move through the earth as fish move through water, the guide replies. Great forces that swim through solid stone, leaving these tubes behind. Surface science does not know of them because they never reach the shallow depths where humans can dig. The protagonist wants to dismiss this as fantasy, but he has already seen too much to cling to his old certainties. If eyeless humans can navigate by senses he cannot name, if fungi can grow to the size of trees without sunlight, if gravity itself is not what he was taught, then why not creatures that swim through stone? They walk for what feels like hours through the smooth tunnel. The protagonist notices that they are descending more steeply now, and the air is growing warmer. A faint smell reaches his nostrils, something like sulfur but not quite, a mineral scent that speaks of deep earth processes. Then, without warning, the passage opens into a chamber so vast that the protagonist gasps. He can sense the space around him, even in the darkness, the way the air moves differently in a large open area, the way sounds dissipate rather than echo. Can we have light? He asks. There is light, the guide says. You simply need to wait for your eyes to adjust. And indeed, after several minutes of standing still in what seems like absolute blackness, the protagonist begins to perceive a very faint illumination. It comes from below, a deep red glow like coals burning at the bottom of a great hearth. As his eyes adjust further, he can make out the shape of the chamber. They stand on a ledge perhaps 100 feet above the floor of an enormous cavern. The ceiling is lost in darkness above, but the floor below glows with that deep red light, and the protagonist realizes with a start that it is not a solid floor at all, but a lake of some glowing liquid. What is that? He breathes. Not lava, the guide says, anticipating his question. Surface dwellers imagine that the Earth's interior is filled with molten rock, but this is not so. The glow comes from phosphorescence, from minerals dissolved in the water, from the friction of tides raised by forces you do not yet understand. Come, there is a path downward. The guide leads him along the ledge to a stairway carved into the rock. The steps are steep and narrow, clearly ancient, worn smooth by countless passages over what must be centuries or millennia. They descend carefully, and as they do, the red glow grows brighter and the air grows warmer. At the bottom, they stand on a shore of black sand beside the glowing lake. The protagonist kneels and touches the water cautiously. It is warm, almost hot, but not uncomfortably so. When he lifts his hand, the water drips from his fingers and each droplet glows like a tiny coal before hitting the surface and merging back into the luminescent mass. We must cross, the guide says. There is no path around. How? I see no boat. We will make one. The guide leads him along the shore to where several large fungi grow, their caps as wide across as a man is tall. The guide begins to pull these fungi down, and the protagonist helps, though he cannot imagine what the guide intends. The fungi are surprisingly light, their flesh spongy and fibrous. Under the guide's direction, they lash the fungi together using strips of tough fungal tissue, creating a crude raft. The protagonist is skeptical that this construction will support their weight, but when they drag it to the water and climb aboard, it floats easily, the fungi apparently filled with some gas that makes them remarkably buoyant. They push off from the shore using long fungal stalks as poles. The glowing water ripples around them, and in the moving light, the protagonist sees things beneath the surface. Ships. Large shapes moving slowly through the depths. What lives in this lake? he asks, trying to keep his voice steady. Adapted things. Life finds a way, even in the most unlikely places. The creatures here have never seen the sun, never known the surface world. They are as native to the interior as you are to the surface. One of the shapes rises closer, and the protagonist gets a better look. It is long and sinuous, perhaps 20 feet from end to end, with a body that seems almost transparent in the red glow. He can see its internal organs, its skeleton, the slow pulse of what might be a heart. It has no eyes, like the guide, but a head covered in what might be sensory organs, tentacles or antennae that wave in the water. The creature surfaces beside the raft, and the protagonist recoils, certain it means to attack. But it merely glides alongside them for a moment, seeming to examine them with those waving sensors, then slips back into the glowing depths. It was curious, the guide says. Nothing more. The life here is not hostile, merely different. Violence and predation are surface concepts, born of competition for sunlight and resources. Here, in the abundance of the interior, life takes other forms. They pole their way across the lake, which seems to take hours. The protagonist's arms ache from the effort, but the guide never seems to tire. The red glow remains constant, never brightening or dimming, giving no indication of time passing. Finally, they reach the far shore, another beach of black sand below another towering wall of stone. They drag the raft up onto the sand, and the guide indicates a passage leading away from the lake, angling once more downward. But before they enter the passage, the guide stops and turns his eyeless face toward the protagonist. "We have reached a significant threshold," he says. "Beyond this point, the laws of the surface world begin to break down more noticeably. Gravity will behave strangely. Time will flow differently. Your very body will begin to change in ways you may find disturbing. If you wish to turn back, this is your last opportunity. I can guide you back to the surface. Your punishment will be considered served. You need not continue." The protagonist stands on the black sand, the glowing lake behind him, the dark passage ahead. For a long moment, he considers the offer. He could return to the surface, to sunlight and familiar things, to the life he knew. But even as he considers it, he knows he cannot. He has come too far, seen too much. He needs to know what lies at the center, needs to understand the mystery that the secret society guards. "I will continue," he says. The guide nods, as if this is the answer he expected. "Then from this point forward, remember that nothing is as it seems. Trust your developing senses, not your surface assumptions. You are entering the realm of ETIDORHPA, and she does not play by the rules you know." They enter the passage, leaving the glowing lake behind. The darkness returns, but the protagonist finds he can navigate it more easily now. He is adapting just as the guide said he would. The passage slopes downward at a steep angle, and they must sometimes scramble over rocks or slide down smooth sections. The air grows thicker, harder to breathe, or perhaps it is just that the protagonist is breathing differently, his lungs adapting to the increased pressure of the depths. After what might be hours, they emerge into another chamber, and this one makes the protagonist stop in his tracks, his mind struggling to make sense of what his eyes are showing him. The chamber is vast, but its geography seems wrong. The walls curve in ways that hurt to look at, as if they exist in more dimensions than 3. What appears to be the floor is also somehow the ceiling, and the passage they stand in seems to spiral around the chamber's perimeter in a way that defies Euclidean geometry. "What is this place?" the protagonist whispers. "A place where space itself is bent," the guide says calmly. "The mass of the earth above us, the forces of the interior below us, they warp the fabric of spacetime. Einstein will discover this principle on the surface in a few decades, but it has always been known to those who descend deep enough to experience it." The guide leads him into the chamber, and the protagonist feels his sense of direction dissolving. They walk on what seems to be a wall, then somehow they are on the ceiling, then the floor again, all without any sensation of climbing or falling. Gravity itself has become optional, or rather, it comes from multiple directions at once. The protagonist feels nausea rising, his surface-trained brain unable to reconcile what his eyes see with what his body feels. But the guide moves confidently through the space, never hesitating, and the protagonist follows, trusting the Eyeless one's guidance even as his own senses scream confusion. They pass through the chamber and enter another passage, and with relief, the protagonist feels normal gravity return. Up is up again, down is down, and the world makes sense in conventional terms, at least for the moment. You will experience many such chambers, the guide says. The interior is not uniform. There are regions where the rules change, where different forces dominate. You must learn to adapt to each in turn. They continue their descent, and the protagonist notices another change. He is less hungry than he was before, less thirsty. His body seems to be becoming more efficient, requiring less fuel. Or perhaps, in the strange atmosphere of the interior, with its unusual pressure and composition, metabolism works differently. The guide explains as they walk, his voice echoing in the passage. The human body is more adaptable than surface science believes. Given time and proper conditions, it can adjust to almost any environment. My own ancestors were surface dwellers like you many generations ago. But they came to the interior and stayed, and over time, their bodies changed. The eyes that served no purpose in the darkness atrophied and disappeared. Other senses expanded to fill the void. We became what we needed to be. But you still look human, the protagonist says. More or less. For now. But descend deeper, and you will meet those who have adapted further, who have become so different from surface dwellers that you might not recognize them as human at all. The interior shapes its inhabitants according to its own needs. This is a disturbing thought, and the protagonist tries not to imagine what he himself might become if he remains in the depths long enough. Will his eyes fade away? Will his bones become hollow to adapt to varying gravity? Will his mind itself change, thinking in patterns incomprehensible to his current self? They walk through passages that sometimes widen into chambers, sometimes narrow to squeezes barely wide enough for a human body. The stone around them varies wildly, sometimes limestone, sometimes granite, sometimes crystals that chime musically when they brush against them, sometimes a black glass-like substance that seems to absorb all light and sound. And then they reach a place where the passage simply ends at a wall of that black glass-like material. The protagonist thinks they must have taken a wrong turn, but the guide walks straight up to the wall and places both his hands against it. Watch, the guide says. The black material ripples like water at his touch. Waves spread out from where his hands make contact, and the solid-seeming wall begins to flow, opening like a curtain to reveal a passage beyond. What is that? The protagonist asks, amazed. A membrane, the guide says. The interior has boundaries, but they are not always solid in the way surface dwellers understand. This is a threshold between regions. Beyond it, the conditions are different. Your body will adjust, but the transition may be uncomfortable. They step through the rippling membrane, and the protagonist feels it pass over his skin like cool water. For a moment, he cannot breathe, and panic seizes him. But then his lungs adapt, drawing breath from air that seems too thin, or perhaps too thick, he cannot tell which. Beyond the membrane, the world has changed again. They stand in a passage where crystals grow from every surface, crystals that emit their own light, a soft white glow that illuminates everything within clarity the protagonist has not experienced since leaving the surface. And in this light, he sees that he himself has changed. His hands, when he holds them up, are paler than before, and the veins show more prominently. His clothes, worn threadbare by the journey, hang loose on a frame that seems thinner than he remembers. He is becoming gaunt, like the guide, his body shedding unnecessary mass. Am I dying? He asks. You are transforming, the guide corrects. The body you carried from the surface was built for surface conditions. Here, it reconstructs itself. This is necessary. If you remained unchanged, you could not survive the deeper regions. They walk through the crystal passage, and the protagonist marvels at the formations. Some crystals are clear as glass, refracting the light into rainbows. Others are opaque, glowing from within. Still others are hollow, containing liquids or gases that swirl in slow currents. The entire passage is a geological wonder, a cathedral of mineral beauty. Chapter 3. The Alchemy of Consciousness. Beyond the chasm, the passage leads them into a region unlike anything the protagonist has yet encountered. The walls here are not stone but something organic, ribbed and curved like the interior of some vast creature. They pulse slowly, rhythmically, as if breathing. The protagonist reaches out to touch one wall and jerks his hand back in surprise. It is warm, feverishly warm, and beneath his fingers he felt something that might have been a heartbeat. "Are we inside something?" he asks, trying to keep the tremor from his voice. "In a sense," the guide replies, his eyeless face tilted as if listening to the walls themselves. "The earth is alive, though not in the way surface dwellers understand life. These passages are arteries, veins, channels through which the planet's vital forces flow. We walk now through the body of the living earth." They proceed through the organic tunnel, and the protagonist becomes increasingly aware of sounds, a distant thrumming, liquid sounds of things flowing through hidden channels, occasionally a groaning or creaking as the passage shifts around them. It is like being inside some sleeping giant, aware that at any moment it might wake. The air here is humid and carries a scent that reminds the protagonist of iron and salt, like blood. He finds this deeply unsettling, but the guide moves forward with his usual confidence, and so the protagonist follows, trying to ignore the way the fleshy walls seem to contract and expand with that slow, regular rhythm. After what might be hours, the organic passage opens into a chamber that takes the protagonist's breath away. It is spherical, perhaps 200 feet in diameter, and its entire inner surface is covered with what appear to be veins or roots, glowing with a soft amber light. These veins pulse in waves, creating patterns of light and shadow that move across the sphere's interior in hypnotic rhythms. At the center of the sphere, suspended in midair with no visible support, floats a crystalline structure. It is roughly the size of a human torso, multifaceted like a diamond, and it glows from within with a light that shifts through the spectrum, now red, now blue, now violet, now colors the protagonist has no names for. "What is that?" he whispers, awed by the beauty of the thing. "A node," the guide says. "A concentration point where multiple energetic currents meet and interact. The Earth is crossed by such currents, flowing through the planet like blood through a body. Where they intersect, structures like this form naturally, crystallizing out of the pure energy. Some call them Earth chakras. Others, ley line nexuses. The names matter less than understanding what they do. And what do? They regulate, they transform, they distribute energy throughout the planet. Without these nodes, the surface world would not exist as you know it. The magnetism that shields the Earth from solar radiation, the tectonic forces that recycle the continents, the subtle energies that living things depend upon, all of these are mediated by the network of nodes." The guide gestures, and somehow, without touching the ground, they begin to float toward the center of the sphere. The protagonist feels no sensation of movement, yet they drift closer to the glowing crystal. As they approach, he becomes aware of a sound, a deep humming that he feels in his bones more than hears with his ears. "Listen to it," the guide instructs. "Open yourself to its frequency." The protagonist tries to relax, to let the vibration wash through him. As he does, something strange happens. His consciousness seems to expand, stretching beyond the boundaries of his skull. For a moment, he perceives the entire network of energy flowing through the Earth, a vast web of light connecting thousands of nodes like this one, creating a living matrix that encompasses the entire planet. He sees the surface world from this new perspective, sees how the dense materiality of surface existence is sustained by these deeper energies, sees how every living thing is connected through invisible threads to this planetary network. And he understands, in a flash of insight that is gone almost as soon as it comes, that consciousness itself is not produced by individual brains but is a property of the entire system, that every human mind is like a wave on an ocean, appearing separate but fundamentally part of a greater whole. The vision fades, and he finds himself gasping, his heart racing. The guide has brought them back to the edge of the sphere, to solid ground. What was that? The protagonist asks when he can speak. A glimpse, the guide says. A momentary connection to the planetary consciousness. The nodes allow such experiences for those who are sensitive enough. What you felt is always present, but the surface world, with its bright light and its distractions, makes it impossible to perceive. Here, in the deep places, the veils are thinner. They rest in the chamber, and the protagonist finds himself unable to look away from the floating crystal. The patterns of its light seem to encode information, messages written in a language of color and vibration. He has the sense that if he could only understand that language, he would know everything, would comprehend the fundamental nature of reality. You are not ready yet, the guide says, reading his thoughts or perhaps his expression. To fully understand what the nodes communicate would require a consciousness far more expanded than yours currently is. But you are progressing. Each day in the interior, each descent into greater depth, expands your capacity. By the time we reach ETIDORHPA, you may be able to comprehend what she reveals. They leave the chamber through another organic passage, descending further. The protagonist notices that his body continues to change. His skin has taken on a faint luminescence, visible in the darkness. His fingers seem longer, more sensitive, able to detect the slightest variations in temperature and texture. His hearing has sharpened to the point where he can hear his own heartbeat, the flow of blood through his veins, even the electrical impulses firing in his nerves. "I am becoming like you," he says to the guide. "You are becoming what you need to be," the guide corrects. "I am adapted to the middle depths, the regions where light is rare but not absent, where human form can still be maintained with minor modifications. If you were to descend to the deepest regions and remain there for years, you would change even more radically. But that is not your destiny. Your journey is temporary, your transformation incomplete. You will see the center, receive the revelation, and then return to the surface. Therefore, your body changes only as much as necessary." This is the first time the guide has explicitly stated that the protagonist will return to the surface. Somehow, hearing it aloud makes it seem both more real and more impossible. How can he return to the ordinary world after experiencing these wonders? How can he live among surface dwellers who have no conception of what lies beneath their feet? But these concerns are for later. For now, there is only the journey, the endless descent, the transformation that continues with each passing moment. They enter a region where the walls are covered with what appears to be writing. Symbols and characters in languages the protagonist does not recognize, some carved into the stone, others painted in luminescent pigments that glow in the darkness. The passages here form a labyrinth, branching and rejoining, and without the guide's unerring navigation, the protagonist would be hopelessly lost within minutes. "Who made these?" he asks, running his hand over a complex symbol that seems to shift and change as he looks at it. "Many different peoples, over many different ages," the guide says. "The interior has been inhabited far longer than the surface. Civilizations have risen and fallen in the depths while surface dwellers were still living in caves. Some of these inscriptions are tens of thousands of years old, records of knowledge long forgotten on the surface. Can you read them? Some. The languages of the deep places are numerous, and many have been lost. But certain symbols are universal, repeated by every culture that has dwelt in the interior. The spiral, representing the descent into deeper truth. The sphere, representing the wholeness of reality. The eye that is also a door, representing the passage from ignorance to enlightenment." The protagonist tries to memorize some of the symbols, thinking he might record them when he returns to the surface. But they slip from his memory almost immediately, as if they are too alien for his mind to hold on to them. It is frustrating, like trying to remember a dream that fades even as you try to grasp it. They emerge from the labyrinth into another vast chamber, and this one contains structures clearly made by intelligent hands. Buildings, or something like buildings, though their architecture is unlike anything from the surface world. They are grown rather than built, it seems, organic structures that have been shaped and directed but not constructed from separate pieces. They rise from the chamber floor like massive fungi or coral formations, their surfaces smooth and flowing, with openings that might be windows or doors. A city? The protagonist asks. One of many, the guide confirms. The interior has been home to numerous civilizations. This one has been abandoned for centuries, its inhabitants having moved deeper or perhaps having died out. But once, this was a thriving metropolis, home to thousands. They walk through the empty streets of the dead city, and the protagonist tries to imagine what life was like here. Did families live in these organic structures? Did children play in these plazas? What did they eat? How did they pass their time? What gods did they worship in the eternal darkness? The silence is oppressive, broken only by the sound of their footsteps and the occasional drip of water from the chamber's ceiling far above. The protagonist feels like an intruder in a tomb, disturbing the rest of the long dead. In the center of the city stands a structure larger than the others, clearly a temple or palace. The guide leads him inside, through corridors where faded murals still decorate the walls. The murals depict scenes from the lives of this vanished people. Processions of eyeless figures in elaborate robes, rituals performed before altars, and again, images of a central figure, feminine in form, radiating light. ETIDORHPA, the protagonist says, recognizing her. Every civilization that has dwelt in the interior has worshipped her in some form, the guide says. She is the source, the mother, the eternal feminine principle from which all material existence flows. These people knew her. They built this temple in her honor. And then, like all civilizations, they passed away, but she remains. They spend the night in the ancient temple, and the protagonist dreams more vividly than ever before. He dreams that he is one of the vanished people, living in this city in its prime. He experiences their lives, their thoughts, their gradual realization that their civilization is dying, that the energy source that sustained them is failing, that they must descend deeper or perish. He watches through their eyes as they make the decision to abandon the city, to descend to lower regions where new energy sources might be found. He feels their sorrow at leaving behind the only home they have known, their fear of what lies in the unexplored depths below. And then the dream shifts, and he is in those deeper regions, witnessing what became of these people. They did not die. They transformed, adapted to the new conditions, evolved into something no longer recognizable as the people who left the city above. They became something else, something suited to the deepest interior, and in that transformation, they lost their old identity completely. He wakes with tears on his face, mourning for a people he never knew, for a civilization that vanished ages before his own was born. The guide sits nearby, and though he has no eyes, the protagonist senses that he is watching, that he understands what the protagonist has just experienced. The dreams come more frequently now, the guide says. As your consciousness expands, you begin to access memories that are not your own, experiences recorded in the planetary matrix. You are learning to read the Earth's history directly, without need for books or teachers. This is one of the gifts of the interior. They leave the dead city and continue their descent. The passages here are rougher, less traveled, as if few have passed this way in recent centuries. The protagonist wonders how many other abandoned cities lie hidden in the Earth's depths, how many civilizations have risen and fallen in the dark, leaving no trace that surface dwellers would ever discover. The air grows warmer again, and thick with moisture. They are approaching another underground body of water, the protagonist realizes, larger even than the glowing lake they crossed earlier. He can hear it before he sees it, a sound like distant surf, waves breaking on an unseen shore. The passage opens onto a beach of white sand that stretches in both directions farther than the eye can see. Before them spreads an ocean, a true ocean contained entirely within the earth. The water is dark but not black, a deep blue-green that suggests tremendous depth. And the ceiling, far above, is covered with what appears to be stars, thousands of points of light that cast a dim illumination over the water. An underground ocean. The protagonist breathes. I didn't think such a thing was possible. Surface geology does not allow for it, the guide agrees. According to conventional science, the pressure at this depth should be so great that no open cavity could exist, let alone one this vast. But surface geology does not understand the true structure of the Earth. This ocean has existed for as long as the planet itself, and it will exist long after the surface oceans have evaporated away. The protagonist stares up at the ceiling lights. Those aren't really stars, are they? No. They are colonies of bioluminescent organisms, similar to the fungi you have seen but adapted to life on the ceiling. They feed on minerals that seep from the rock, and in return, they provide light. An entire ecosystem depends on them, just as surface life depends on the sun. The protagonist notices movement in the water near the shore. Waves lap gently at the sand, and in those waves, he sees shapes moving, creatures swimming in the shallows. Some are small, fish-like things that dart and flash. Others are larger, slower, with forms that defy easy classification. We must cross this ocean, the guide says. It will take days, perhaps weeks, but we have no choice. The passage to the deeper interior lies on the far shore, and there is no path around. How will we cross? I saw you build a raft before, but that was on a much smaller body of water. This is an ocean. A storm could destroy us. There are no storms here, the guide says. The waters of the interior are calm, protected from the atmospheric disturbances that plague the surface. But you are right that a simple raft would not suffice. We must find a vessel or build one. They walk along the beach, searching. The sand is littered with strange objects, shells unlike any surface species, bones of creatures that might be fish or might be something else, chunks of a porous stone that floats when the protagonist tosses it into the water. After walking for what feels like miles, they come upon what they are seeking. A boat, if it can be called that. It is grown rather than built, a single piece of some organic material shaped like a canoe. It is perhaps 20 feet long, with a ribbed structure that suggests it was once alive, or perhaps still is in some sense. This will serve, the guide says, examining the vessel. It was left by previous travelers, and the custom of the interior is that such things are shared. We may use it, and when we reach the far shore, we will leave it for whoever comes next. They drag the boat to the water's edge. It is surprisingly light, and when they set it floating, it sits high in the water, buoyant and stable. They climb aboard, and the guide produces 2 paddles from inside the boat, apparently left there by its previous users. They push off from the shore and begin to paddle. The water is smooth as glass, reflecting the ceiling lights above. It creates a disorienting effect, as if they are floating in space among stars rather than on an underground ocean. As they paddle farther from shore, the protagonist looks back and watches the beach disappear into the distance. A feeling of vulnerability washes over him. They are now completely exposed, floating on an alien ocean beneath a false sky, with no land in sight in any direction. Don't worry, the guide says, somehow sensing his anxiety. I know the way. There are currents here, invisible to you but perceptible to me. We will follow them, and they will carry us to the far shore. They settle into a rhythm of paddling, and the protagonist finds it almost meditative. The water whispers against the hull of the boat. The ceiling lights twinkle above. Occasionally, something large moves in the depths below, a shadow passing beneath them, but nothing approaches or threatens. Time becomes meaningless again. They paddle, they rest, they eat from supplies the guide has brought. They sleep in the boat, taking turns, one paddling while the other rests. The protagonist discovers that he can sleep sitting up, still holding the paddle, his body moving through the motions automatically even while his mind rests. On what might be the 3rd day of their voyage, or perhaps the 4th, they encounter something extraordinary. The water ahead begins to glow, a soft phosphorescence that grows brighter as they approach. As they paddle into the glowing region, The protagonist sees that the water is full of life, billions upon billions of tiny creatures, each one emitting a spark of light. The boat moves through this living light, leaving a glowing wake behind them. Every paddle stroke creates explosions of luminescence. The protagonist leans over the side and trails his hand in the water, and his fingers leave trails of light like liquid fire. "Beautiful, isn't it?" the guide says. These organisms are one of the primary food sources in the ocean. Larger creatures feed on them, and those creatures are fed upon in turn. They are the plankton of the interior, the foundation of the food chain. As if summoned by the mention of larger creatures, something enormous rises from the depths. The protagonist glimpses a vast body, easily 100 feet long, moving slowly through the glowing water. It is pale, almost translucent, with a body structure that seems to defy anatomy. He cannot tell where the head ends and the body begins, cannot count how many fins or limbs it possesses. It moves with a flowing, undulating motion, more like a living wave than a creature. The boat rocks in the disturbance created by the creature's passage, but the thing shows no interest in them. It is feeding on the glowing organisms, its cavernous mouth filtering enormous quantities of water. A leviathan, the guide says. One of the largest creatures in the interior ocean. Harmless to us as we are too small to interest it, but magnificent nonetheless. They watch the creature feed for several minutes before it descends back into the depths and disappears. The protagonist realizes he is trembling, not from fear but from awe. To witness such a creature, to know that it exists unknown to surface science, to understand that entire ecosystems thrive in the Earth's hollow interior, it fills him with a wonder that borders on the sacred. They emerge from the glowing region and continue across the dark water. The protagonist has lost all sense of how far they have traveled, how long they have been at sea. His arms ache from paddling, but the pain has become background noise, easily ignored. And then, finally, the guide points ahead. Land. At first, the protagonist sees nothing, but as they paddle closer, a darkness resolves against the ceiling lights, a mass that must be a far shore. They paddle with renewed energy, eager to reach solid ground again. The shore, when they reach it, is not sand but stone, smooth rock sloping gently into the water. They beach the boat and climb out on shaking legs. The protagonist's body has adjusted to the constant motion of the boat, and now the unmoving ground feels strange, almost unsteady. They pull the boat up onto the stone, leaving it for future travelers as the guide said they would. Then they turn inland, seeking the passage that will take them deeper. But first, the guide insists they rest. They find a sheltered spot among tumbled boulders and make camp. The protagonist is more exhausted than he realized, and he falls asleep almost immediately. He dreams of swimming through the glowing water, his body transformed into something streamlined and efficient. He dreams of diving deep, deeper than any surface creature could survive, into regions where the pressure should crush any living thing. But in the dream, he is unharmed, adapted to these depths, and he swims toward a light he sees far below, a light that pulses with a rhythm like a heartbeat. The light grows brighter and brighter until it fills his vision completely, until he is surrounded by it, immersed in it, becoming one with it. And in that moment, he understands something fundamental about the nature of existence, something that cannot be put into words, can only be experienced. He wakes with the understanding already fading, slipping away like water through his fingers. But the sense of it remains, a bone-deep certainty that reality is not what it appears, that consciousness is the fundamental substrate from which all else emerges, that the material world is a kind of dream dreamed by a vast intelligence. The guide is sitting nearby, and the protagonist has the sense that he has been watching him sleep, monitoring his dreams somehow. "You are progressing well," the guide says. "The ocean crossing has accelerated your transformation. The isolation, the exposure to the deep waters, it has opened you further. You are nearly ready." Ready for what? For the final descent. For the deep teaching. For the communion with ETIDORHPA herself. The protagonist sits up, his heart beating faster. How much farther? Not far now in terms of physical distance. But the remaining journey will be the most difficult, not because of external obstacles, but because of internal ones. You must confront yourself, shed the last remnants of your surface identity, become something new. This is the trial that awaits in the deepest interior. They gather their things and find the passage leading from the shore. It is large and well-worn, suggesting that many have passed this way over the ages. The walls are smooth, almost polished, and they descend at a steep angle into the earth. As they walk, the protagonist realizes something has changed in his perception. He can now see in what had previously been total darkness. Not clearly, perhaps, but well enough to navigate without difficulty. The guide notices this development. "Your eyes are adapting," he says. "Not losing their function as mine have, but expanding their range. You are beginning to perceive wavelengths beyond the visible spectrum, to detect the subtle radiations that all matter emits. This is another sign that you are ready for what comes next." The passage leads them ever downward, through regions where the temperature rises until the protagonist is sweating, then falls until he shivers with cold. They pass through chambers filled with strange mineral formations, through caves where underground rivers rush past in the darkness, through narrow squeezes and vast galleries. And finally, as the third hour of our journey draws to a close, they arrive at a place the guide calls the threshold of transformation. It is a circular chamber with a single passage leading out the far side. The walls are covered with the same shifting symbols the protagonist saw in the ancient labyrinth, but these glow with their own light, pulsing in patterns that seem almost alive. In the center of the chamber sits a stone pedestal, and on the pedestal rests a small bowl carved from a black material that seems to absorb light. In the bowl are several mushrooms, dark and gnarled, unlike any the protagonist has eaten before. "This is it," the guide says, his voice solemn. "The sacrament of the deep places. To proceed further, you must consume these fungi. They will expand your consciousness beyond anything you have yet experienced. You will die, in a sense, and be reborn. Your old self will be dissolved, and a new self will emerge. There is no going back from this point. Once you take the sacrament, you are committed to completing the journey." The protagonist approaches the pedestal slowly, looking down at the mushrooms. They seem to pulse with a dark vitality, and he can sense the power contained within them. This is the true threshold, he realizes. Everything before this has been preparation. What comes after will be the journey's true purpose. He reaches out and takes one of the mushrooms. It feels warm in his hand, almost alive. He looks at the guide, seeking some final reassurance, but the eyeless face is unreadable. The protagonist brings the mushroom to his mouth and bites down. The taste is beyond description, bitter and sweet and savory all at once, with undertones of flavors that should not exist. He chews and swallows, then takes another mushroom and another, until all of them are gone. At first, nothing happens. He stands there, waiting, wondering if perhaps he is immune to their effects. And then reality begins to dissolve around him. Chapter 4. The Vision of Eternity. The walls of the chamber begin to breathe, expanding and contracting like lungs. The glowing symbols float free from the stone, hovering in the air around him like luminous insects. The protagonist tries to focus on them, but each symbol he looks at transforms into another, and then another, an endless cascade of meaning that his mind cannot quite grasp. He looks at his hands and sees that they are transparent, and through them he can see the bones, the blood vessels, the nerves, but he can also see deeper, to the molecules that comprise his flesh, to the atoms that comprise the molecules, to the particles that comprise the atoms. And deeper still, to the waves of probability, to the quantum foam, to the fundamental vibrations that underlie all of material existence. Everything is vibration, he understands. Everything is frequency and wave and rhythm. Matter is condensed energy, energy is condensed thought, thought is condensed consciousness. It all flows downward, from the most subtle to the most dense, and then cycles back up again, from matter to energy to thought to the void from which all things emerge. He tries to speak, to tell the guide what he is experiencing, but when he opens his mouth, no words come out. Instead, colors pour forth, ribbons of pure light that paint meanings directly onto the air. He watches these colors spiral and dance, and he understands that this is a language more fundamental than words, that he is speaking in the tongue of creation itself. The guide stands before him, but now the protagonist can see what the guide truly is. Not a human, or not merely human. The Eyeless One is a nexus point, a place where multiple timelines converge, where different possible versions of humanity meet and intermingle. He contains within him the genetic memory of countless generations of interior dwellers, all their adaptations, all their knowledge, all their accumulated wisdom. And the protagonist sees his own future selves, branching out like a tree. In one timeline, he returns to the surface and lives out his days as a broken man, dismissed as mad by all who hear his story. In another, he never returns at all, choosing instead to remain in the interior and complete his transformation into something beyond human. In another, he becomes a guide himself, leading other initiates on the same journey he is now undertaking. All of these futures are equally real, equally present. Time is not a line but a landscape, and he stands at a high point from which he can see in all directions simultaneously. The mushroom has opened doors in his mind that he did not know existed. He is experiencing reality from a perspective usually reserved for the gods, and the weight of this perspective is almost unbearable. He understands now why surface dwellers are not given this knowledge freely, why the secret societies guard it so jealously. Most people would go mad from what he is seeing. Most minds would shatter under the weight of this much truth. But he has been prepared. The journey through the interior, the gradual adaptation, the teachings of the guide, all of it has strengthened his mind, expanded his capacity, made him able to withstand revelations that would destroy an unprepared consciousness. He sees the earth now, not as a planet but as a living being. He sees the surface as its skin, the shallow caves and mines as minor blemishes on that skin. He sees the true body of the earth, the vast hollow interior with its oceans and continents, its ecosystems and civilizations. He sees the energy currents that flow through the planetary body like blood through veins, the nodes where these currents intersect and concentrate, creating points of heightened consciousness. And at the very center, he sees her, ETIDORHPA, the heart of the world, the source from which all material existence flows. She is not a being in any conventional sense. She is a place and a principle, a function and a consciousness. She is the point where pure potential becomes manifest reality, where the infinite possible becomes the finite actual. She is the womb from which all forms are born and the tomb to which all forms return. He sees her in flashes, glimpses that his mind can barely process. She appears as a sphere of pure light, but also as a vast feminine figure, but also as a geometric structure of impossible complexity, but also as something his mind has no categories to contain. She is all of these and none of these, always exceeding any form or concept that tries to capture her. And she is calling to him. He can feel it now, a pull like gravity but not gravity, drawing him toward the center. She has always been calling, since the moment he entered the earth, but only now, with his consciousness expanded by the sacred mushroom, can he hear her clearly. The protagonist realizes he is weeping, tears streaming down his face, but he does not know if they are tears of joy or terror or some emotion for which no word exists. He is witnessing the machinery of creation, the process by which consciousness becomes matter, and it is beautiful and terrible beyond all measure. Time loses meaning. He might stand in this chamber for minutes or hours or years. His body remains motionless, but his consciousness travels, exploring the visions the mushroom has unleashed. He visits places that do not exist in space, times that are not part of the temporal sequence. He experiences lives he has not lived, deaths he has not died, loves and hates and triumphs and failures that belong to other beings in other realities. He sees the history of the earth from its formation to its ultimate end. He watches the first life emerge in the deep oceans, watches it evolve and diversify, watches some of it descend into the interior while other lines remain on the surface. He sees the rise of humanity, sees the branching of human evolution into multiple paths, some leading to the surface dwellers he knows, others leading to the eyeless ones of the interior, still others leading to forms that are barely recognizable as human. He sees that consciousness is not unique to humans, or even to animals. Everything is conscious in its own way. The stones beneath his feet have a kind of awareness, slow and patient, thinking thoughts that take millennia to complete. The earth itself is conscious, a vast mind that encompasses all the smaller minds within it. And beyond the earth, the sun is conscious, and the other planets, and the galaxy itself is a single vast organism, thinking thoughts too large for any individual mind to comprehend. This understanding should make him feel insignificant, but instead it fills him with a sense of belonging. He is not separate from this vast consciousness, not isolated and alone. He is a cell in the planetary body, a neuron in the cosmic brain. His individual experiences contribute to the larger experience of the whole, and the experience of the whole flows through him. The vision begins to change, to focus. He is being shown something specific now, something he needs to understand before he can proceed. He sees that reality is layered, like an onion. The outermost layer is the physical world as perceived by conventional senses, the world of solid matter and simple causation. But beneath this layer lies another, the etheric realm where forces and energies flow, where the life force that animates all living things can be directly perceived. Beneath the etheric lies the astral, the realm of emotions and dreams, where consciousness begins to show its creative power, where thought and feeling shape reality more directly. Beneath the astral lies the mental, the realm of pure ideas, of archetypes and principles, where the templates for all physical forms exist. And beneath the mental lies the causal, the realm of pure consciousness, undifferentiated awareness, the source from which all the other layers emerge. ETIDORHPA dwells in the causal realm, but she extends tendrils of her presence into all the other layers, including the physical. The center of the earth, where he is being led, is a place where the causal realm breaks through into the physical most completely, where the boundary between the worlds is thinnest. He understands now that his journey is not just physical but metaphysical. With each descent into greater depth, he has been moving not only through layers of rock but through layers of reality. He has been working his way back toward the source, toward the causal realm, toward the undifferentiated consciousness that underlies all of existence. The visions begin to fade. The walls of the chamber solidify again. The protagonist's sense of his individual body returns, though it feels different now, as if he is wearing it loosely rather than being trapped within it. He looks at the guide and sees that time has passed, more time than he realized. The guide is sitting patiently, as if he has been waiting for hours or perhaps days. How long has the protagonist been standing here, lost in visions? There is no way to know. "Welcome back," the guide says softly. The protagonist tries to speak and finds that words work again, though they seem clumsy now, inadequate tools for expressing the things he has experienced. "I saw." He begins, then stops, realizing the futility of trying to describe what he saw. "I understand now. Or I'm beginning to understand." "You have seen what all initiates must see," the guide says. "The structure of reality, the layers of being, the source from which all things come. But seeing is not the same as fully understanding, and understanding is not the same as embodying. There are further stages yet to come." The protagonist's legs are shaking, and he sits down heavily on the stone floor. His body feels strange, as if it belongs to someone else. He looks at his hands and sees that they are more translucent than before, the skin so pale that veins show clearly beneath it. His fingers seem longer, the bones more delicate. He is continuing to change, adapting to the conditions of the deep interior. How much of what I saw was real? He asks. All of it, the guide says. And none of it. The mushroom shows truths, but it shows them through the filter of your mind, your expectations, your capacity to understand. Another person consuming the same mushroom would see different visions. But the underlying truth would be the same. And ETIDORHPA? I saw her or glimpsed her. Is she truly at the center? She is the center. Not a being dwelling at the center, but the center itself, personified. When we reach the deepest point, you will not meet her as you would meet another person. You will merge with her, experience her from within. You will become, for a moment, the point from which all existence flows. And that experience will complete your initiation. The protagonist tries to imagine this and finds he cannot. What he saw in the vision was already beyond his capacity to fully comprehend. How can he merge with the source of all reality and remain himself? You will not remain yourself, the guide says, again reading his thoughts. That is the point. The self you have carried from the surface, the ego that thinks it is separate and isolated, will dissolve. What remains will be something both less and more than that ego. You will return to the surface, if you choose to return, but you will not be the same person who descended. They rest in the chamber while the protagonist's body and mind recover from the mushroom vision. He sleeps again, and his dreams are strange, filled with geometric patterns and mathematical equations that seem to encode the fundamental laws of reality. He dreams in colors that do not exist in the surface world spectrum, experiences emotions that have no names in any surface language. When he wakes, he feels clarity he has never known before. The fog that usually clouds perception has lifted. He sees everything with perfect sharpness, understands connections he never noticed before. It is as if the mushroom has cleaned some lens in his mind, allowing him to perceive reality more directly. I'm ready to continue, he tells the guide. They leave the chamber and enter the passage beyond. This passage is different from all the others they have traversed. The walls are perfectly smooth and black, made of that same glass-like material he saw earlier. They reflect nothing, absorb all light, creating a darkness so complete that even the protagonist's adapted vision struggles to penetrate it. But he finds he does not need vision here. His other senses have expanded so much that he can navigate by sound, by the feeling of air currents, by senses he has no names for. He can feel the shape of the space around him, sense the presence of walls and obstacles without seeing them. The passage descends steeply, and they must sometimes climb down rather than walk. The protagonist's body moves with a grace he never possessed on the surface. His muscles have been refined by the journey, his balance perfected, his movements efficient and precise. They descend for what feels like days through this passage of black glass. Occasionally, they stop to rest and eat, but the protagonist needs less food and water than before. His body is becoming more efficient, learning to extract energy directly from the atmosphere, from the subtle forces that flow through the earth. At last, the black passage opens into a chamber, and the protagonist stops in his tracks, stunned by what he sees. The chamber is enormous, easily miles across, and its entire volume is filled with structures that defy easy description. They are like crystals, but also like buildings, but also like living organisms. They grow from floor to ceiling and wall to wall, creating a three-dimensional matrix of impossible complexity. And they are alive. Not metaphorically but literally. The structures pulse with light, moving slowly, growing, shifting, rearranging themselves in patterns that seem purposeful. Colors flow through them like blood through veins, and from them comes a sound, a deep harmonic resonance that the protagonist feels in his bones. The city of the Eyeless, the guide announces. The greatest civilization of the interior. My home, and the home of all those who have fully adapted to life in the deep places. As the protagonist's eyes adjust to the scene, he begins to perceive movement among the structures. Figures moving with fluid grace, navigating the three-dimensional maze with perfect confidence. They are humanoid in basic shape, but clearly different from surface humans. Like the guide, they have no eyes. But their other features are even more refined, more delicate, almost ethereal in their beauty. Some of them notice the new arrivals and approach. They move without walking, somehow floating or gliding through the air. When they come close, the protagonist can see that they are nearly translucent, their internal organs visible through skin that seems barely more substantial than mist. One of them, who might be male or female or neither, the protagonist cannot tell, reaches out and touches his face gently. The touch is cool and soft, and the protagonist feels a sensation like electricity flowing through him. The eyeless one tilts their head, as if listening, and then makes a gesture to the guide. The guide responds in a language the protagonist has never heard, a musical tongue full of sounds that seem to convey more meaning than words should be able to hold. The eyeless one responds, and a conversation ensues, though the protagonist cannot understand it. Finally, the guide turns to him. They welcome us. They have been expecting us. They say that you are the first surface dweller to reach this city in many years, and that your arrival has been anticipated. How did they know I was coming? Time flows differently here. They perceived your arrival before you began your journey. From their perspective, all moments are equally present. Past, present, and future are like different rooms in a house, and they can look into any room they choose. The eyeless ones lead them deeper into the city, if city is the right word for this place. The structures around them are not separate buildings but a single vast organism, all parts connected, all growing from the same root. It is like walking through the interior of some cosmic brain, along pathways that are also thoughts, through chambers that are also concepts. They come to a space that might be a dwelling or might be a temple, the protagonist cannot tell which. The eyeless ones gesture for him to sit, and he does, settling onto a surface that molds itself to his body, supporting him perfectly. One of the eyeless ones approaches with a vessel containing a luminous liquid. They offer it to the protagonist, and the guide nods encouragingly. Drink. It will help you understand our language, will help you perceive as we perceive. The protagonist drinks. The liquid tastes like light, if light could have flavor, and as it flows down his throat, he feels warmth spreading through his body. His perception shifts, expands, and suddenly he can understand the musical language the eyeless ones speak. More than that, he can perceive the layers of meaning beneath the words, the emotional content, the conceptual structures they encode. One of the eyeless ones begins to speak, and the protagonist understands. Welcome, traveler from the surface. You have come far, and your journey is nearly complete. We know why you are here. You seek the center, seek communion with ETIDORHPA, seek the truth that your secret society guards. We will help you, for this is our purpose. We are the guardians of the deepest mysteries, the keepers of the gate that leads to the final revelation. The protagonist finds he can respond in their language, though he does not consciously know how. I am grateful for your welcome. But I must ask, why do you help surface dwellers at all? Why not keep these mysteries for yourselves? Because knowledge hoarded becomes stagnant, the eyeless one replies. Truth must flow, must be shared and renewed by each generation. We guide initiates from the surface not out of charity but out of necessity. The mysteries must be kept alive by constant renewal, constant engagement. Without surface dwellers making the descent, without new minds encountering the old truths, the knowledge itself would calcify and die. They offer food, and it is unlike anything the protagonist has tasted before. It is synthesized from the basic elements, created directly from atoms by a process that seems more like alchemy than cooking. Each bite contains exactly the nutrients his transformed body needs, and nothing more. As he eats, the eyeless ones tell him of their civilization. They explain how their ancestors were surface dwellers who discovered passages into the interior thousands of years ago. How they descended seeking knowledge and found instead a whole new world. How they adapted over countless generations, their bodies changing to suit the conditions of the deep places, their consciousness expanding to fill the spaces that opened as their physical needs diminished. They tell him of their science, which is not separate from their spirituality but deeply intertwined with it. They have mastered the manipulation of matter at the atomic level, can transmute elements, can create substances unknown to surface chemistry. But they do this not through machines but through focused consciousness, through direct engagement with the quantum realm. They show him some of their creations, crystals that store information more densely than any surface computer, organisms engineered to fill specific ecological niches, structures that exist partially in other dimensions, folded through space in ways that conventional geometry cannot describe. And they tell him of ETIDORHPA, the goddess who dwells at the center. They explain that she is not a separate being but the Earth's consciousness itself, focused and concentrated at the planetary core. Every living thing on Earth, surface or interior, is connected to her. She is the common ground of all consciousness, the shared substrate from which all individual minds emerge. When you reach the center, one of the Eyeless ones says, you will merge with her. Your individual consciousness will dissolve into the planetary consciousness, and for a timeless moment, you will experience existence from her perspective. You will know what it is to be the entire Earth, to feel the weight of the oceans, the fire of the core, the thoughts of every living thing. And when you separate again, when you return to your individual perspective, you will carry that knowledge with you always. The protagonist feels fear rising. Will I lose myself completely? Will I cease to exist as an individual? Yes and no, the Eyeless one says. Your ego, your sense of being separate and isolated, will dissolve. But your essential nature, the consciousness that has been watching all your experiences, that will remain. You will lose nothing real. You will only shed the illusions that have caused you suffering. They speak through the night, or what passes for night in this place where no sun rises or sets. The protagonist learns more in these hours than he learned in all his years on the surface. The Eyeless ones share their understanding of reality, their knowledge of the hidden forces that govern existence, their wisdom accumulated over millennia of dwelling in the depths. And gradually, the protagonist begins to understand why the secret societies guard this knowledge, why it cannot be simply told but must be experienced through the ordeal of descent. Words alone cannot convey these truths. They must be encountered directly, must be lived and felt and integrated into one's being. The journey itself is the teaching, and the destination is merely the culmination of all that has been learned along the way. As the fourth hour of our journey draws to a close, the protagonist rests in the city of the Eyeless, preparing himself for the final descent. He knows now that he is close, that only a little farther down lies the ultimate destination, the center where ETIDORHPA waits. And he knows that when he reaches that center, he will be changed forever, that the person who returns to the surface, if he returns at all, will be someone fundamentally different from the person who began this journey. Ever, the old man continues, we have decided upon a different sentence. You will undertake a journey. You will be taken into the earth through passages known only to this brotherhood. You will be guided to the deepest interior, and there you will discover whether the knowledge you so carelessly revealed is truth or allegory. If you survive this journey, you will understand why these secrets are guarded. If you do not survive, well, the earth will keep your secret. Two men step forward from the shadows. One is ordinary enough, a stocky fellow who will serve as an initial escort. But the other, the one who will serve as the true guide for this journey, is unlike anyone the protagonist has ever seen. This guide is tall and thin, almost skeletal in his appearance. His skin is pale, nearly translucent, with a faint luminescence as if he carries some inner light. His hair is long and white, hanging like fine silk around his gaunt face. But the most striking feature, the detail that will haunt the protagonist for the rest of his life, is that this guide has no eyes. Not the closed eyelids of a blind man, but smooth skin where eyes should be. The eye sockets exist, you can see their subtle indentation, but they are covered by seamless pale flesh. And yet, this eyeless guide moves with perfect confidence. His head turns to look directly at the protagonist, though he cannot possibly see in any conventional sense. "I will be your guide," the eyeless one says, and his voice is surprisingly gentle, almost melodious. "Do not fear me. I am what you may become, should you survive long enough in the deep places. I am humanity adapted to the interior realm. Come, we have far to travel, and the way is long." The protagonist is given no time to gather belongings or say farewells. That very night he is led from the chamber through a passage he had never noticed before, a narrow tunnel that slopes steadily downward. The ordinary escort accompanies them for the first stage of the journey, carrying supplies and a lamp. They walk through the night and into the next day, though day and night soon lose meaning in the tunnels. The passage is sometimes natural limestone cave, water dripping from stalactites, sometimes carved stone that speaks of ancient human labor. The air is cool and damp, and their footsteps echo strangely. After what might be hours or days, impossible to tell in the eternal darkness, they stop to rest in a wider section of the passage. The ordinary escort unpacks food, bread, dried meat, a flask of water. They eat in silence, and the protagonist realizes he may never taste surface food again. "How long will this journey take?" he asks. The eyeless guide tilts his head in that unsettling way, as if listening to something beyond normal hearing. "Time is different in the deep places. What seems like months to you may be years on the surface, or perhaps only days. The interior follows its own rhythms." "And where exactly are we going?" "To the center," the guide says simply. "To the place where all things begin and end. To the sphere of ETIDORHPA." What is ETIDORHPA? The guide's lipless mouth curves into something that might be a smile. "You will see. Or rather, you will experience it, for seeing is not the only way, or even the best way, to know truth." After their rest, they continue. The ordinary escort leaves them at what he calls the waypoint, a junction where multiple passages meet. He shakes the protagonist's hand with genuine sympathy, then turns back toward the surface, taking the lamp with him. Now the protagonist and the eyeless guide are alone in absolute darkness. "I cannot see," the protagonist says, fighting rising panic. "Nor can I," the guide replies, "and yet I know exactly where we are and where we must go. You will learn. Your eyes are useless here. Let them rest. Develop your other senses." The guide takes the protagonist's hand, his fingers cool and smooth, and leads him forward into the darkness. The protagonist stumbles often at first, his free hands scraping against the rough stone walls. But the guide never falters, never hesitates, moving through the blackness as easily as one might walk through a familiar room in daylight. As they descend, the protagonist begins to notice changes. The air grows warmer, then cooler, then warmer again in cycles that seem to have no pattern. The stone beneath his feet changes texture, sometimes smooth, sometimes rough, sometimes feeling almost metallic. And strangest of all, he begins to sense things in the darkness, vague impressions of space and distance, as if some dormant sense is slowly awakening. "Good," the guide says, somehow knowing what the protagonist is experiencing. "You are beginning to perceive without light. This is the first step." They walk for what feels like days, stopping periodically to rest and eat from supplies that the guide produces from a pack. The food is strange, fungi with odd textures and tastes, water collected from underground streams that has a mineral tang, and once, something that might be fish or might be something else entirely, caught in an underground pool. During their rests, the guide begins to teach. And what he teaches contradicts everything the protagonist learned in school, everything he thought he knew about the world. "Tell me," the guide says, his voice echoing in the darkness, "what is gravity?" "Gravity is the force that pulls objects toward each other," the protagonist responds. "Newton discovered that all matter attracts all other matter." "And yet Newton was wrong," the guide says calmly. Or rather, he observed an effect but misunderstood its cause. Gravity is not a pulling force. It is a pushing force. That makes no sense. Does it not? Consider, what we call space is not empty. It is filled with a subtle substance, an ether that permeates all things. This ether presses upon all matter from all directions. A large body, like the Earth, shields the ether from one direction. Therefore, objects near the Earth are pushed toward it by the unbalanced ether pressure from above. What seems like attraction is actually directed pressure. The protagonist wants to argue, to defend his conventional understanding, but something in the guide's certainty makes him pause. And besides, down here in the darkness, descending into impossible depths, who is to say what is true and what is false? And light, the guide continues, is not what illuminates, but what obscures. True sight exists in darkness, where the distracting waves of light do not interfere with perception. Then how do you see? The protagonist asks. I perceive, the guide corrects. I sense the etheric currents, the emanations of matter, the vibrations of space itself. Your eyes, so dependent on light, blind you to these deeper realities. That is why we who dwell in the interior have evolved beyond the need for eyes. We have adapted to perceive truth directly. As they continue their descent, the protagonist finds himself increasingly convinced by these strange teachings. Perhaps it is the sensory deprivation, the absolute darkness and isolation. Perhaps it is the guide's calm authority. Or perhaps, in some way he cannot yet understand, he is beginning to perceive these things for himself. The passages they traverse become increasingly unusual. There are sections where the protagonist feels as if he is walking on walls or ceilings, though the guide assures him they are still descending. There are chambers so vast that sound barely echoes, as if they are crossing some underground plane under a ceiling miles high. There are narrow squeezes where they must crawl on their bellies through spaces barely wide enough for a human body. And then, after what the protagonist estimates as weeks of travel, though he has long since lost any accurate sense of time, they emerge into a space where the darkness is not quite absolute. There is light, faint and blue-green, coming from the walls themselves. Phosphorescent fungi, the guide explains. The first of many light sources you will encounter in the deep places. The interior is not as dark as surface dwellers imagine. The protagonist can now see, dimly, their surroundings. They stand in a cavern so large that the ceiling is lost in darkness above. The walls are covered in fungi of every conceivable shape and size, from tiny glowing dots to massive shelf-like growths as large as tables. The light they produce is ghostly, giving everything an otherworldly appearance. And the guide, seen for the first time since they left the surface, is even more unsettling than the protagonist remembered. His eyeless face turns this way and that, and the protagonist realizes with a chill that the guide is looking around, perceiving their surroundings through senses he cannot imagine. We will rest here, the guide says. Eat of these fungi. They are nourishing and they will help prepare your body for the deeper regions. The protagonist picks one of the glowing mushrooms. It feels cool and slightly slimy, pulsing with faint light. He bites into it cautiously. The taste is strange, earthy and bitter, but not unpleasant. As he eats, he feels warmth spreading through his body, and his vision seems to sharpen, the dim blue-green light becoming almost adequate. They make camp in the fungus forest, if such a term can be applied to this alien landscape. The protagonist realizes he is beginning to adjust to this strange world. The darkness no longer terrifies him. The guide's eyeless face no longer disturbs him quite as much. He is changing, adapting, becoming something other than what he was on the surface. And this, he will later understand, is the true purpose of the journey. Not to reach a physical destination, but to transform the traveler. To strip away the comfortable certainties of surface life and rebuild the self according to a different blueprint. As he lies down to sleep among the glowing fungi, the protagonist has his first dream since entering the earth. He dreams of falling, not down but inward, spiraling toward some central point where all lines of force converge. And in that center, he glimpses something vast and feminine, a presence that is somehow the source of all material existence. He wakes with a start, the dream fading but its emotional resonance lingering. The guide sits nearby, his eyeless face turned toward the protagonist. "You dreamed of her," the guide says. "It is not a question. Her. ETIDORHPA, Aphrodite reversed. The goddess of the interior, the mother of matter, the womb of worlds. She calls to all who descend. You will meet her at the journey's end, if you survive that long." The protagonist sits up, his heart racing. Is she real? Is she a being, a place, or something else entirely? "Yes," the guide replies, which is no answer at all. They continue their journey through the fungus forest. The protagonist notices that the fungi come in endless varieties. Some grow in spiral patterns that hurt to look at, as if they exist in more dimensions than 3. Others pulse in synchronized rhythms, creating waves of light that wash across the cavern floor. Still others seem to reach toward them as they pass, though whether this is purposeful movement or mere tropism, the protagonist cannot tell. "Are these plants?" he asks. "Neither plant nor animal in the surface sense," the guide says. "Fungi occupy a different kingdom of life, and here in the interior, they have evolved to fill every niche. Some produce light as you see. Others generate heat. Still others produce gases or liquids that support different forms of life. This entire ecosystem exists without sunlight, without green plants, based entirely on the chemistry of decay and synthesis that fungi master." As they walk, the guide reaches out and plucks a small, dark mushroom from the wall. He hands it to the protagonist. "Eat this one carefully. Only a small bite." "What does it do?" "It expands perception. You are ready for the next stage of understanding." The protagonist hesitates, then bites off a tiny piece of the mushroom. The taste is intensely bitter, and he nearly spits it out, but he forces himself to swallow. At first, nothing happens. They continue walking through the forest of glowing fungi. Then, gradually, the protagonist becomes aware of changes in his perception. The blue-green light seems brighter, more nuanced. He can see individual wavelengths, separating them as one might separate the notes in a musical chord. The fungi around him pulse not just with light but with some other emanation, a kind of vital force that he can almost see, almost touch. His own body feels different, lighter, as if gravity is weakening. Or perhaps, as the guide would say, the ether pressure is changing. He can feel the space around him in a new way, sensing the dimensions of the cavern, the distance to the walls, the presence of other living things even when he cannot see them. "What is happening to me?" he asks, and his voice sounds strange, as if he is hearing it from outside his own body. "You are beginning to perceive the etheric realm," the guide says. "The mushroom has temporarily enhanced your sensitivity. This is a preview of what you will eventually experience permanently if you continue to adapt." The protagonist walks in a daze of heightened perception. He sees patterns in everything, mathematical relationships, geometric structures underlying the apparent chaos of nature. The fungi are not growing randomly but following precise rules, creating fractals that repeat at every scale. The very stone of the cavern walls vibrates with energy, atoms dancing in their eternal motion, and he can almost perceive their dance. Time loses meaning. He might walk for hours or days in this state. The guide leads him onward, deeper and deeper, and the protagonist follows in a trance of revelation. Gradually, the effects of the mushroom fade, and his perception returns to something closer to normal. But he is changed. He has seen behind the veil, glimpsed the hidden machinery of reality. Nothing can ever be quite the same. "That was a small dose," the guide says. "Later, when we reach the deeper places, you will consume the full measure. Then you will understand everything." They emerge from the fungus forest into a passage that slopes ever downward. The glowing fungi become less common, and they return to darkness, but now the protagonist finds he can navigate more easily. His other senses have sharpened. He can hear the subtle echoes that reveal the shape of passages, feel the temperature gradients that indicate open spaces, sense the faint air currents that suggest distant chambers. He is becoming like the guide, adapted to the lightless depths. And with this adaptation comes a creeping realization. He may never be able to return to the surface world. Not because the path is blocked, but because he is changing too fundamentally. The surface world with its bright light and shallow certainties may become as alien to him as this inner realm once was. How much farther? He asks. Far, the guide replies. We have barely begun our descent. The passages we have traveled are like the vestibule of a vast temple. The true interior lies far below. And so they continue, into depths that no surface dweller has explored, toward a destination that defies conventional understanding. The protagonist has crossed a threshold from which there may be no return. His former life, his former identity, all of it is being left behind like a snake's shed skin. In the darkness, descending endlessly, he begins to understand what the guide has been trying to teach him. The journey is not about reaching a destination. The journey is about becoming someone who can reach that destination. Every step down is a step away from his old self. Every moment in the darkness is a moment of transformation. This is the secret the society guards. Not mere knowledge that can be spoken, but an experience that must be lived. A journey that changes the traveler so fundamentally that they become the living embodiment of the mystery. As the first hour of our story draws to a close, the protagonist and his eyeless guide disappear into the deeper darkness, descending toward wonders and terrors that await in the hollow earth below. The teachings of the deep. The protagonist wakes, or becomes aware, it is hard to say which, for sleep and wakefulness blur together in the city of the Eyeless. He finds himself lying on a surface that breathes gently beneath him, a living bed that has molded itself perfectly to his form. Around him, the crystalline structures of the city pulse with soft light, creating patterns that seem almost like dreams made visible. One of the eyeless ones is nearby, sitting in a posture of perfect stillness. As the protagonist stirs, this being turns their eyeless face toward him. You are ready for the deeper teachings, the being says, their musical voice carrying harmonics that resonate in the protagonist's chest. Before you can approach ETIDORHPA, you must understand certain principles. Your guide has taught you much, but there are things that can only be shared here, in the deep places, where the words themselves can be spoken without shattering. The protagonist sits up, his body feeling lighter than ever before, as if gravity has released its hold on him almost entirely. He realizes with a start that he is actually floating slightly above the surface he was lying on, suspended by some force he cannot name. Do not be alarmed, the eyeless one says. At this depth, matter and energy exist in different ratios than on the surface. Your body has been refined, purified, made so light and subtle that the natural buoyancy of the etheric currents can support you. This is why we move as we do, why we do not walk but float. We have become more energy than matter, though we retain enough material substance to maintain individual form. The being gestures, and the protagonist finds himself drifting through the air, following his host deeper into the city. They pass through chambers filled with wonders, gardens where plants that are also minerals grow in impossible geometries, libraries where knowledge is stored not in books but in crystals that sing their information directly into the mind, workshops where artisans shape raw matter with their thoughts alone. They come to a chamber that is clearly a place of teaching. The walls are covered with diagrams and symbols that shift and change, illustrating principles of science and philosophy that surface schools have never dreamed of. Several other eyeless ones are here, waiting. They arrange themselves in a circle, and the protagonist is brought to the center. We will share with you the 7 mysteries, one of them announces. These are the fundamental truths that underlie all existence, that govern the relationship between consciousness and matter, spirit and form. Listen carefully, for you will need to understand these principles when you stand before ETIDORHPA. The first of the eyeless ones begins to speak, and as they do, the symbols on the walls animate, illustrating their words with living diagrams. The first mystery is the mystery of vibration. All things are in motion. Nothing rests. Reality at its most fundamental level is not made of particles or waves, but of vibrations in the fabric of existence itself. Different rates of vibration create what appear to be different substances: matter, energy, thought, consciousness. But all are the same underlying reality, vibrating at different frequencies. As the eyeless one speaks, the protagonist sees the truth of this. He perceives the atoms that make up his body, sees them vibrating, dancing in their eternal motion. He sees how his thoughts are also vibrations, patterns of energy moving through the neural networks of his brain. And he sees how these different levels of vibration interpenetrate each other, how matter and thought are not separate but intimately connected. The second eyeless one speaks. The second mystery is the mystery of polarity. Everything has its opposite, and opposites are identical in nature but different in degree. Hot and cold are the same thing, merely different intensities of temperature. Love and hate are the same emotion, expressed in opposite directions. Light and dark are the same phenomenon, presence and absence of illumination. Understanding polarity allows you to transmute one quality into its opposite, to move along the scale that connects all apparent opposites. The protagonist sees this truth illustrated in the symbols on the walls, sees how every quality contains its opposite within itself, how all things exist on continuums rather than as separate categories. He understands now how alchemy works, how lead can be turned to gold by adjusting its vibrational frequency along the metallic spectrum, how base emotions can be transformed into noble ones by shifting their polarity. The third speaks. The third mystery is the mystery of rhythm. Everything flows, out and in. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. The pendulum's swing manifests in everything. The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm compensates. Understanding this mystery allows you to avoid being swept along by the tides of circumstance, to rise above the rhythmic swing. The protagonist feels this truth in his own experience. He sees how his journey has been a rhythm, descending and rising, expanding and contracting, losing himself and finding himself again. He sees how the earth itself breathes in great cycles, how civilizations rise and fall, how even consciousness itself has its rhythms of waking and sleeping, knowing and forgetting. The fourth eyeless one continues. The fourth mystery is the mystery of causation. Every cause has its effect. Every effect has its cause. Everything happens according to law. Chance is but a name for law not recognized. There are many planes of causation, but nothing escapes the law. Understanding this mystery allows you to rise to higher planes of causation, to become a cause rather than merely an effect. The protagonist sees the chains of cause and effect stretching out in all directions, sees how every event is the result of countless prior events, and how every event will cause countless future events. He sees that free will and determinism are not opposites but operate on different levels, that one can be subject to causes on lower planes while being a cause on higher planes. The fifth speaks. The fifth mystery is the mystery of gender. Gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes. The masculine principle seeks to project, to penetrate, to make active. The feminine principle seeks to receive, to contain, to make receptive. Creation requires both principles working in harmony. Understanding this mystery reveals how all generation, whether of ideas or matter, requires the interaction of these two modes. The protagonist sees how this applies not just to biological reproduction but to every creative act. Ideas are masculine, seeking expression. Matter is feminine, receiving form. Consciousness is masculine, awareness projecting outward. The unconscious is feminine, depth receiving impressions. And at the center of the earth, ETIDORHPA represents the ultimate feminine principle, the receptive void that allows all forms to manifest. The sixth Eyeless one speaks. The sixth mystery is the mystery of correspondence. As above, so below. As below, so above. The patterns repeat at every scale. The atom mirrors the solar system. The cell mirrors the planet. The human mirrors the cosmos. Understanding this mystery allows you to know the great by studying the small, to understand the inner by observing the outer. The protagonist sees the truth of this reflected in the very structure of the city around him, which mirrors the structure of a brain, which mirrors the structure of the planetary energy network, which mirrors the structure of the galaxy. Everything is a fractal, he realizes, patterns repeating at every level of scale, so that studying any part reveals the nature of the whole. The seventh and final teacher speaks, and their voice carries a gravity that the others did not have. The seventh mystery is the mystery of mind. The all is mind. The universe is mental. Reality as you experience it is a thought in the mind of the infinite consciousness. Matter is crystallized thought. Energy is thought in motion. Your individual mind is a droplet of the infinite mind, apparently separate but fundamentally one with the source. Understanding this mystery is to understand everything, for if all is mind, then by changing your mind, you change your reality. This final mystery resonates with everything the protagonist has experienced on his journey. He sees now that the physical descent through the earth has been a metaphor for, or perhaps a manifestation of, a descent through the layers of mind. He has been traveling not through external space but through the depths of consciousness itself, moving from the surface illusions toward the fundamental reality of pure awareness. The seven eyeless ones fall silent, and the symbols on the wall stabilize into a complex diagram that somehow encodes all seven mysteries simultaneously. The protagonist studies this diagram, and he feels it burning itself into his memory, becoming part of him. These seven mysteries are the keys, one of the teachers says. When you stand before ETIDORHPA, you will need to demonstrate your understanding of each. Not through words, but through being. She will test you, not with questions but with experiences. If your understanding is purely intellectual, you will fail. But if you have integrated these truths into your very being, if you have become them rather than merely knowing them, then you will be able to merge with her and return intact. The protagonist feels the weight of this challenge. He has understood the mysteries intellectually, but has he truly embodied them? He is not certain. As if sensing his doubt, one of the eyeless ones places a hand on his shoulder. The touch sends waves of reassurance through him. You have come this far. You would not have survived the journey if you were not ready. Trust in the process. Trust in your own transformation. You are no longer the person who began this journey. You have become something new, something capable of what lies ahead. They lead him to another chamber, one filled with a soft golden light that seems to emanate from the air itself. In the center of this chamber is a pool of liquid that glows with the same golden radiance. This is the pool of purification, one of the eyeless ones explains. The final preparation before the descent to the center. The liquid will complete your transformation, will strip away the last remnants of your surface nature, will make you as light and pure as possible so that you can withstand the intensity of communion with ETIDORHPA. The protagonist looks at the pool, feeling both anticipation and fear. Each step of this journey has required him to let go of something, to shed some part of his old identity. What will this pool take from him? Only what you no longer need, the eyeless one says, again reading his thoughts or perhaps his expression. Only the weight that would prevent you from making the final ascent or descent, for at this point the directions become meaningless. The protagonist removes what little clothing he still wears, the tattered remnants of his surface garments. His body is almost unrecognizable now, pale and thin, almost translucent, more like the body of the eyeless ones than like a surface human. He steps to the edge of the pool and dips a toe in. The liquid is warm, almost hot. and where it touches his skin, he feels a tingling sensation. He takes a breath and steps into the pool. The liquid is thicker than water, more viscous, and it clings to his skin as he wades deeper. When it reaches his chest, he feels it beginning to work, feels it seeping into his pores, penetrating his flesh, reaching toward his very bones. He submerges completely, going under the surface, and the liquid fills his mouth, his nose, his lungs. He should be drowning, but he is not. The liquid carries oxygen, or something like it, and he can breathe it, drawing it into his lungs and expelling it in a rhythm that is slower and deeper than his normal breathing. Suspended in the golden liquid, he feels the transformation accelerating. His cells are being cleansed, purified, refined. Toxins accumulated over a lifetime are being dissolved and carried away. The dense, heavy matter that makes up a surface human body is being transmuted into something lighter, more subtle, more suited to the conditions of the deepest interior. He loses track of time. He might float in this pool for minutes or hours or days. He is aware of his body changing, becoming more translucent, more ethereal. He can see his own skeleton glowing softly within the translucent flesh. He can see his organs, his heart beating slowly, his lungs expanding and contracting, his blood flowing like rivers of light through his veins. And then something unexpected happens. His eyes begin to hurt, a sharp pain that makes him want to cry out. He feels them burning, dissolving, and panic seizes him. He is going blind. The pool is taking his eyes, making him like the eyeless ones. But then the pain fades, and he realizes what has happened. His physical eyes are gone, but in their place, something else has opened. He can still see, but not with organs of flesh. He is seeing directly with consciousness itself, perceiving without the need for light or lenses. This is what the eyeless ones meant when they said they see more truly than those with eyes. He rises from the pool, or perhaps is lifted by the eyeless ones who attend this chamber. The liquid runs off his body, which is now so light that he can barely feel it, as if he is wearing his flesh like a loose garment rather than being trapped within it. They bring him a mirror, and he looks at his reflection. The face that looks back is barely human. It is eyeless, the sockets covered with smooth pale skin. The features are refined, delicate, almost elfin. The body is tall and thin, the skin translucent, glowing faintly with its own light. Is this permanent? He asks, his voice sounding different, more musical than before. Nothing is permanent, one of the eyeless ones replies. If you return to the surface and remain there long enough, your body will gradually revert. The eyes may even grow back, though they will never work quite the same way they did before. But for now, this is what you are. This is what you need to be to complete the journey. They dress him in a garment made of woven light, or something that seems like light made solid. It weighs nothing and provides neither warmth nor coolness, but it covers his transformed body with a radiance that seems appropriate for what lies ahead. Now, the guide says, appearing suddenly as if he has been waiting for this moment, now you are ready. We descend to the final depth. We go to the center where ETIDORHPA waits. The protagonist is led to a shaft that opens in the floor of the city. It is perfectly circular, perfectly smooth, descending straight down into darkness. Or rather, what he would once have called darkness. Now, with his new vision, he can see perfectly well, can perceive the shaft extending down and down, farther than his mind can quite comprehend. This shaft goes directly to the center, the guide explains. It is the axis around which the Earth spins, the pole around which all else revolves. It has been here since the planet's formation, and it will remain until the planet's end. Many have descended this shaft. Few have returned. Several of the eyeless ones gather around them, forming a circle. They begin to hum, a deep resonant tone that seems to make the air vibrate. The protagonist feels himself lifting, rising from the floor, suspended by the sound itself or by some force the sound invokes. "We cannot go with you," one of the eyeless ones says. "This final stage you must travel alone, or rather, with only your guide. We will maintain the tone to ease your passage, but the descent itself is yours to make. The protagonist and the guide drift toward the shaft opening. As they pass over the edge, the protagonist looks down and sees the shaft extending into infinity, a perfectly straight tube that seems to reach toward the very heart of existence. And then they are falling, though falling is not quite the right word. They are descending, moving downward at a speed that should be terrifying but somehow feels peaceful. The walls of the shaft blur past, and the protagonist becomes aware of a sound, a deep thrumming that grows louder and more insistent as they descend. It is a heartbeat, he realizes. They are descending toward the heart of the world, and they can hear it beating, a slow and powerful rhythm that makes his own heart synchronize with it, that makes his entire being pulse in time with this fundamental rhythm. The shaft is not empty. As they descend, they pass through regions filled with light, with color, with patterns that seem to have meaning beyond his ability to interpret. They pass through what might be memories embedded in the rock, scenes from the Earth's long history playing out in the walls around them. He sees the planet's formation, the accretion of dust and gas into a glowing sphere. He sees the bombardment by asteroids and comets that brought water to the surface. He sees the first stirrings of life in the deep oceans. He sees the continents splitting and reforming, the rise and fall of countless species, the emergence of consciousness in various forms. And he sees the future as well, or possible futures. He sees the surface world transformed by climate change, by human folly or human wisdom. He sees civilizations rising and falling like waves. He sees the eventual death of the sun, the Earth becoming a frozen ball drifting through space. But even in that far future, life persists in the interior, insulated from the cold of outer space, continuing its evolution in the warmth of the planetary core. The visions are overwhelming, and the protagonist feels his sense of individual identity beginning to dissolve. He is becoming less a separate person and more a point of awareness witnessing the vast sweep of planetary time. His concerns, his fears, his hopes, all of them seem trivial against this backdrop of geological and cosmic time. The guide speaks, his voice cutting through the protagonist's disorientation. Hold on to yourself a little longer. You must remain coherent until you reach the center. There will be time enough for dissolution then. The protagonist focuses on the guide's voice, uses it as an anchor to maintain his sense of self. They continue to descend, and the heartbeat grows louder, more insistent, until it drowns out all other sound, until the protagonist's entire being is nothing but that pulse, that rhythm, that fundamental beat. And then, suddenly, the shaft opens into a vast space, and they emerge into the center of the Earth. The protagonist's mind struggles to comprehend what he is seeing. It is a sphere, as he was told, but a sphere unlike any surface geometry could describe. It seems to be both solid and hollow, both finite and infinite, both there and not there. It glows with a light that is not light, radiates a warmth that is not heat, exerts a pull that is not gravity. And it is alive. Not metaphorically but literally alive. The sphere breathes, pulses, thinks. It is conscious in a way so vast and comprehensive that the protagonist's individual consciousness is like a single neuron compared to an entire brain. This is ETIDORHPA. This is the heart of the world. This is the source from which all material existence flows and to which all existence returns. The protagonist hangs in the space around the sphere, suspended by forces he cannot name. The guide is beside him, but somehow distant, as if they are separated by more than mere physical space. Go to her, the guide says. Complete your journey. I will wait here for your return, if you return. The protagonist tries to move toward the sphere, but he realizes that movement in the conventional sense has no meaning here. Space itself is warped, folded, made strange by the intensity of the forces at play. He does not move toward ETIDORHPA. Instead, he opens himself to her, and she draws him in. As he approaches the surface of the sphere, he sees that it is not a surface at all but a boundary, a transition point between one state of existence and another. And as he passes through that boundary, as he enters into ETIDORHPA herself, he feels his individual consciousness beginning to dissolve, feels himself merging with something incomprehensibly vast. The fifth hour of our journey ends as the protagonist crosses the threshold, as he surrenders his individual existence and merges with the consciousness of the planet itself, beginning an experience that will transform him utterly and forever.